What happens when a quiet morning on the lake turns into a battle of pride, power, and hidden truths? The sun barely peeked over the horizon, casting a golden shimmer across Lake Serenity. Ethan Caldwell stood at the edge of his small, weathered dock, his kayak resting lightly on the water's surface. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were the gentle lapping of waves and the distant call of a loon. For Ethan, this was secrete ritual to clear his mind, to escape the weight of a world that often felt too heavy. He adjusted his life vest, his fingers brushing the worn fabric, a gift from his late father, who'd taught him to love this lake. But as he pushed his kayak into the water, a sharp voice sliced through the calm. "You can't launch that here." Ethan turned, startled. Standing on the shore was Margaret Hensley, the self-appointed queen of the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association. Her arms were crossed, her lips pursed into a thin line, her eyes gleaming with the kind of righteous indignation only a clipboard-wielding bureaucrat could muster. Behind her stood a small entourage, 3 other HOA members, all nodding in sync like obedient puppets. "I've been launching my kayak here for years, Margaret," Ethan said, keeping his tone even. "This is my property." "Not according to the updated bylaws," she snapped, waving a piece of paper like a royal decree. "This shoreline is now designated as a protected common area. No personal watercraft launches without HOA approval." Ethan's jaw tightened. The HOA had been a thorn in his side since they'd moved into power 5 years ago, enforcing rules that seemed to exist only to control and exclude. He'd inherited this lakeside cabin from his father, a place where memories of fishing trips and late-night campfires lived in every creak of the floorboards. Now, it felt like the HOA was trying to erase that legacy one petty rule at a time. "Margaret, this is ridiculous. My dock's been here for decades. You can't just—" "I can and I will," she interrupted. "I've already called the sheriff. They're on their way." Ethan froze. The sheriff? Over a kayak? He wanted to laugh, but the glint in Margaret's eyes told him she wasn't bluffing. This wasn't just about a kayak launch. It was personal. He'd clashed with her before over his untrimmed hedges, his unsightly mailbox, his refusal to attend HOA meetings. To Margaret, Ethan was a rebel who didn't belong in her perfectly manicured vision of Lake Serenity. As the sound of a siren grew closer, Ethan's heart pounded. He wasn't a troublemaker, but he wasn't a pushover either. He'd fought for this place, for the right to call it home. If Margaret wanted a fight, she'd get one. Sheriff Tom Delgado arrived, his patrol car kicking up dust on the gravel road. He was a stocky man with a tired expression, the kind of cop who'd seen too many neighborhood disputes to care deeply about any of them. "All right, folks," he said, stepping out. "What's the issue here?" Margaret launched into her tirade, pointing at Ethan's kayak like it was a weapon of mass destruction. Tom listened, scribbling notes, his face unreadable. Ethan explained his side calmly, firmly, emphasizing his property rights and the dock's history. Tom nodded, then walked to the water's edge, inspecting the scene. "Seems like a misunderstanding," Tom said finally. "Ethan, you got any paperwork showing this dock's on your land?" Ethan nodded, pulling out a folder from his cabin. He handed over the deed, the survey, the permits, everything his father had meticulously filed decades ago. Tom scanned the documents, then turned to Margaret. "Looks legit to me. This is his property, Ms. Hensley." Margaret's face reddened. "That's impossible. The HOA has authority over all shoreline activity." "Not over private property," Tom said, his tone flat. "Unless you've got something else to show me, I'd say this is settled." But Margaret wasn't done. She stormed off, muttering about further action, her entourage trailing behind. Ethan thought that was the end of it. He was wrong. The next morning, Ethan woke to a commotion outside. He stepped onto his porch to find a crowd gathered near the lake, not at his dock, but at Margaret's. Her sprawling, modern lake house sat 100 yards down the shore, complete with a massive dock that jutted out like a challenge to nature itself. Today, though, that dock was surrounded by county officials, a surveyor and Sheriff Tom. Ethan wandered over, curiosity piqued. A young woman in a county uniform, clipboard in hand, was speaking to Margaret, who looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "Miss Hensley," the woman said, "our records show your dock extends well beyond your property line. It's on public land, and it was built without permits. That's a violation." Margaret sputtered. "That's absurd. This dock was here when I bought the house." "Doesn't matter," the surveyor chimed in, holding up a map. "Your property ends here." He pointed to a line that cut Margaret's dock in half. "The rest is illegal. You'll need to remove it or face fines." Ethan couldn't help but smile. The irony was delicious. Margaret, the rule enforcer, had been breaking the law all along. But then, a new figure emerged from the crowd, and Ethan's smile faded. It was Clara, his neighbor, a quiet widow who rarely spoke at HOA meetings. She stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "I reported it," Clara said, looking straight at Margaret. "I've watched you bully people for years, Ethan, me, anyone who didn't fit your mold. But I found the old surveys in my husband's files. Your dock's been illegal since it was built." I couldn't stay silent anymore. The crowd murmured. Margaret's face went from red to white. Clara, the unassuming widow who'd always kept to herself, had just turned the tables. Ethan felt a surge of respect and guilt. He'd never bothered to know Clara, assuming she was just another HOA follower. He'd been wrong. Margaret's composure cracked. "You'll regret this," she hissed at Clara, then turned to the officials. "I'll fight this in court." But the officials were unmoved. The surveyor marked the dock with orange tape, signaling its impending demolition. Sheriff Tom tipped his hat to Ethan and Clara before driving off. The crowd dispersed, leaving Margaret alone on her illegal dock, staring at the water as if it had betrayed her. For a moment, Ethan felt a flicker of triumph. Margaret had gotten what she deserved. But as he walked back to his cabin, Clara's words echoed in his mind. She'd spoken of bullying, of years of silence. Ethan realized he'd been so focused on his own battles that he'd missed the bigger picture, the way Margaret's rules had suffocated the entire community. He thought of his father, who'd always said the lake was for everyone, not just those who could afford to control it. That evening, Ethan invited Clara over for coffee. They sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the lake in hues of orange and pink. "Why'd you do it?" he asked. "Why now?" Clara sighed, her eyes distant. "My husband loved this lake. He died last year, and I realized I'd been hiding in his shadow, letting people like Margaret run things. I couldn't let her ruin what he loved." Ethan nodded, the weight of her words settling in. He'd been fighting for his own piece of the lake, but Clara had fought for something bigger, for the soul of the place they all called home. Days later, the demolition crew arrived. Margaret's dock was torn down, plank by plank, until only a jagged scar remained on the shore. The HOA meetings grew quieter after that. Margaret's influence diminished. But the victory felt hollow. Ethan learned that Margaret's husband had left her years ago, and the lake house was all she had left, a fragile empire she tried to protect with rules and power. Her cruelty, he realized, came from a place of loneliness, a desperate need to belong. Ethan kept kayaking, but each morning, as he glided across the lake, he couldn't shake the image of Margaret standing alone on her ruined dock. The lake was free again, but at what cost? Freedom had come not with joy, but with a bitter truth. Even the worst among us are human, and their downfall doesn't always feel like a win.